The Last Unicorn is basically pure magic. It's the story of the last unicorn in the world, only she doesn't know it. She finds out from some hunters passing through her forest that no unicorns have been seen in an untold number of years. She doesn't believe it. She can't believe that their unicorns would be gone, and she wouldn't know it. Eventually, it troubles her so much she has to leave her forest, which she hasn't been out of in centuries, and go out into the world seeking the rest of her kind. What follows from that is an amazing quest, characters who have to be read or seen to be believed, and one of the truly great fantasies of all time.
Then look into the sky where through the clouds a path is torn. Look and see her, how she sparkles. It's the last unicorn. I'm alive. I'm alive.
My introduction to Last Unicorn came when I was 14 years old. I'd been a fan of Peter's work for a long time already. I'd read short stories he'd written. But then in 1968, Ballantine Books put out something called the Adult Fantasy Series, and the first two books they issued were Peter Beagle's A Fine and Private Place and Peter Beagle's The Last Unicorn. I was 14 years old. I could not believe that one human being could write two such amazing books that were so radically different from each other, and yet equally wonderful in their different ways. And I just became a huge, huge fan on the spot, and followed his career as closely as I could after that.
I started The Last Unicorn. I made a couple of false starts, then came up with the line, "The unicorn lived in a lilac wood, and she lived all alone." And it was like that summer, one line at a time. Because I didn't know what I was doing. I was making it up as I went along. But I did get 85 pages done that summer, most of which, almost all of which, eventually came to throw out. Because I didn't know whose story it was. I didn't know where it was going. And it has been, that first draft has been published as a separate book, The Lost Unicorn. And it was my wife, really, who prodded me into trying The Last Unicorn over again. She liked that first draft and wanted to know what happened. Kept explaining to her that I didn't know. And so very slowly I did go back to work on it. And I really still didn't know what I was doing, only that I was doing something else that I hadn't done before. I certainly didn't know whom she was going to meet at the Midnight Carnival. But Schmendrick the Magician finally wandered into the book. I hung fire for, I think, 3 weeks, because he came out of bedtime stories that I've been telling my oldest daughter, Victoria. Every evening, another catastrophe of the world's worst magician. And suddenly there he was. Well, you need somebody here. It might as well be Schmendrick.
Who are you?
I am called Schmendrick the Magician. You won't have heard of me. I entertain the sightseers as they gather for the show. It's not much of a job for a real magician, but I've had worse.
And in the same way, I didn't know what had become of the unicorns. That line of the butterflies, they passed down all the roads long ago, and the Red Bull ran close behind them and covered their footprints. I didn't know what that meant. The Red Bull eventually came out of a painting that was given to me by my cousin's then husband, who was a painter. That was 1956 when I was 17. And it's a painting of unicorns fighting bulls. And one of the bulls is red. And as far as I know, that is the origin of the Red Bull. But where that line came from, I don't know.
You can find the others if you are brave. They passed down all the roads long ago, and the Red Bull ran close behind them and covered their footprints.
The Red Bull? What is the Red Bull?
Looking back at it now, I can see foreshadowings that look very impressive and look as though I knew what I was doing, but I didn't. Some part of me did.
This is the Lady Amalthea. We seek audience with King Haggard.
I knew that Amalthea was the name of the goat that nursed and protected the god Zeus when his father wanted to eat him, and his mother hid him out in the Greek island of Lemnos. But I'd forgotten it. I only remembered it after the fact. In the same way, when I wrote down a list of one-syllable names for the prince. I don't know why Prince Lear had to have a one-syllable name, but he did. And when I finally settled on LIR, it really did not occur to me that he'd grow up eventually and become King Lear. And more than that, I'd stumbled in the name of one of the greatest of the Celtic sea gods, Manannán mac Lir, L-L-Y-R. I knew that, and I didn't know it. Don't mean to be mysterious, but that's what happens when you're got a peculiarly cluttered mind.
I wish I could see her just once more to tell her all that's in my heart. She will never know what I really meant to say.
She will remember your heart when men are fairy tales and books written by rabbits.
It took me about 1.5 years to get over feeling that it's a bloody disaster. I'd worked so hard on it for what? And I came to be fond of it gradually, but I didn't really think of it as a movie at all. And nothing had ever come of it until Michael Chase Walker showed up out of nowhere with astonishing determination.
So after reading the book, falling in love with it, I called up Peter's agent, Maggie Fields, and out of the blue just said, I want to buy the rights to it, whatever it's going to take. And so she immediately, did the kind of thing, come back in 8 years, kid, and I was too dumb to, to take no for an answer.
I knew Michael had been hustling that story around pretty much everywhere, and I didn't have any great hopes for it. By that time, I learned not to have great hopes.
At the time when the option was about to expire, and I hadn't really gotten anywhere, I went to the bank and said, look, I own the rights to this. I want to buy it outright, and I'd like you to loan me the money to do it. So this little farm bank in Illinois actually gave me the money to buy the rights outright, which was the equivalent, I'm told, of $188,000 of that time value.
It finally soaked in that that's real money, that's a real check.
I was meeting with the heads of these major studios until I met with Warner Brothers. And at that time, they made a deal for a lot of money just to option it for 6 months. And they were waiting for the box office returns of Ralph Bakshi's Lord of the Rings, which Peter had written the screenplay for. Then when Lord of the Rings didn't perform as much as they'd hoped for, it went into turnaround. At that time, I got into business with a great, great producer, Daniel H. Blatt, who had done Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3, and I knew him from New York, from family. And so Danny got on board and started, using all of his power to bring us into the studios. He goes, I know who's perfect for this. And within like a few days, we were in meeting with Martin Starker, who was one of the greatest and classiest studio heads. He said, somebody was just in here pitching this project. It was Jules Bass. Rankin Bass was in here pitching this project. I had really been everywhere, turned down everywhere. So I got on the phone to Jules Bass. I said, hey, I understand you were talking to... He goes, yes. Immediately hit up a relationship, over the phone. He said, well, let's do this. Let's get this done.
Rankin and Bass were an important animation company. Arthur Rankin Jr. and Jules Bass came together in the post-war 50s advertising world, and they started to do interesting things with animation, first for commercials, and then they began to do television animation and specials for Christmas, like Frosty the Snowman and Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. And they pioneered a kind of a imaginative, low-budget animation filmmaking, doing stop motion originally. And they also pioneered a technique which is now commonplace of working all over the world, going where your budget will stretch this farthest, because they didn't have a lot of money to work with. They found ways to work in countries where that money would go further. And they were one of the very first people to pioneer working overseas on an American production.
The chances of it happening somewhere else was getting very, very, minimal. And so Rankin Bass, who I had vowed would never go to the last people on earth to do this, were the ones being presented before me.
I hated everything of Rankin and Bass's I'd ever seen, right down the line. But that was pretty much the only game in town. At least they let me write the script.
It was tacit, understood by all of us that Peter would do the script. And it wasn't contractual, it was just that everybody felt that he was the perfect person to make the adaptation.
I'm better at adapting other people's stories than my own. I realize that. But with this one, Well, at least I'd already been there and had a pretty good idea of what would work, what not to do. Sometimes I overdid that. I took things out that Jules Bass insisted on putting back in, which raised his standing in my estimation, but I just thought that nobody's going to be interested in this, or it just wouldn't work in animation. I'd learned a few lessons working on The Lord of the Rings, major one being that animation wants to move. Animation isn't interested in sitting still while people pass information back and forth to each other. Animation wants to be animated.
It was almost a go from that moment on. The script was just poetic, lyrical. It was just, you know, one of the best screenplays any of us had read at that point.
She chose her death long ago. It was the fate she wanted.
And you have no regrets, as I do.
I can never regret. I can feel sorrow, but it's not the same thing.
The look of the film was very much Arthur's, you know, and, you know, look, they had done like 20 motion pictures. So he knew his stuff, and he was he's a great art director himself. So Arthur Rankin just called in his very best and his favorite talents. For The Last Unicorn, he called in Lester Abrams, who did a lot of the initial concept characters, which are just stunning. I remember them to this day. They were just beautiful, just beautiful. And so from Lester Abrams, it would go over to the animation studios in Japan.
The process of making something where much of the work is being done in Japan and some of the work is being done in the States, and it's all being coordinated out of the States, is of course phenomenally complicated, especially since they were doing it at a time before there was an internet, before there was Skype, before you could just pick up the phone and do a quick, easy international dial to people. It was very complicated. It involved long delays of shipping things across the ocean, long delays of getting feedback, having to travel over there and work in person a lot. And they parsed it out. Arthur Rankin focused mainly on the Japanese side of things and the visual production side of things, and Jules Bass worked primarily on doing the voice recording, the story development, the things which kept him in the United States.
Basically, the designs would come in, we would have our storyboard artists along with the screenplay, and then the material would come back with commentary, like what's a loony bird? Or what's an Irish lilac tree like? You know, and we have to describe and do that. Then their answer storyboards would come back, and you could literally see things that they didn't really understand at all that needed to be translated and corrected, and we would do all that.
Tell me what you see. Don't be afraid. Look at your fellow legends and tell me what you see.
What he calls a manticore looks to be no more than a shabby, toothless lion. And she has them believing that poor old ape with the twisted foot is a satyr. Illusions, deceptions, mirages. Your mommy Fortuna cannot truly change things.
The main thing it introduced, however, was also a lot of opportunity for creative confusion and the creativity that comes from misunderstanding what you're dealing with and language issues that you're dealing with. There are many things about the character design where you see that some of the characters look quite a bit different. Good example of this is Rook at the Midnight Carnival looks very different from most of the other characters. And that's because he is absolutely the American character design. There's not a hint of the Japanese preference in there at all. Whereas other characters were purely the Japanese design or interesting combinations of the two that happened as they wrangled it out. So you'd have an American designer come up with a look, American storyboard artists come up with a sequence of events, send that material to Japan, and the Japanese would interpret it. And in some cases, they would have to be dialed back or changed, or they'd just get it completely wrong compared to what they wanted. Or in other cases, they do wonderful things, like the pirate cat flipping the eye patch. That was an animator invention.
I would tell you what you want to know if I could, Mum, but I be a cat, and no cat anywhere ever gave anyone a straight answer.
There are a number of character designs in the film which are more Japanese than American and close to exclusively Japanese. The Red Bull is phenomenally Japanese in conception. I have seen early sketches by various artists in the States who worked on the Red Bull, and they are red flaming bulls, but they don't have the form, the weight, the shape, the character of the final bull, which is overwhelmingly the work of a man whose last name is Kubo. His full name is Sugiyuki Kubo, but he just goes by Kubo in the credits, and he was the key animator on the project, and he had a profound impact on the look and feel of the entire thing.
It was true magic.
Yeah, it's gone now, but I had it. It had me, but it's gone. I couldn't hold it.
Leaving us so early, magician? No. Can it truly be? Where have you been? Where have you been?
The casting of The Last Unicorn was entirely, purely Jules and Arthur.
Here, Rankin Bass pioneered something as well, because if you look back at animated films being made at the time by Disney and other places, you had some famous actor casting or well-known actor casting, but you didn't have what has become commonplace now, where major A-list stars are playing vocal parts in animated films.
They were big shots in New York and in the production scene. Probably one of the few movie companies or animation companies in New York outside of those who were doing just television commercials. And they had the infrastructure. They had William Morris Agency. They were renowned, especially in Broadway. They hired a lot of Broadway actors, stars, for all of their shows.
There they were in 1981, 82, and they have Angela Lansbury and Christopher Lee and Rene Auberjonois and Jeff Bridges and Alan Arkin and Tammy Grimes, all these huge names of the day. And every single one of them was someone who either loved the material or fell in love with it on exposure, like Alan Arkin. And all of them were the first request. This is a movie where they didn't have to go with their second choice for any single part in the film. And they all did a really incredible job.
Who is she, Molly? Where does she come from? I don't know any more about her than I did the first day she came here.
Your Highness?
Except that I wish to serve her, as you do, to help her find whatever she has come here to find. I wish to be whatever she has most need of. Will you tell her so?
Jeff Bridges was Dan Blatt, my original partner's friend. And they did a lot of movies. I think they had just done Winter Kills together. And Jeff had said to Dan Blatt that The Last Unicorn was one of his favorite books ever. And he would come over and literally just beg to be a part of the production. He was not that well known at that time, I mean, outside of being, the Bridge family. But his love for the book was so great, and he was so eager and so enthusiastic to do it that when I called up Jules and said, Jeff Bridges really wants to get involved with it, then Jules, just sewed it up and made it happen.
The sea is always good. There is nothing that I can look at for very long, except the sea.
What is the matter with your eyes? Why can I not see myself in your eyes?
Christopher Lee was Dracula, and not too many people were aware of his great vocal presence, as we soon learned within this film. But Jules had brought Chris in, and then we went to the old Charlie Chaplin studios, which were the Herb Alpert's A&M Records, for the recording. And Chris came in there. Jeff Bridges did his voiceovers there, and it was quite brilliant at that point.
I am King Haggard. This is Prince Lear, my son.
Hi, glad to meet you.
What is your concern with me?
We seek, sire, to enter your service.
I need no servants.
Oh, but surely, sire, a magician, a fine cook,
You are losing my interest, and that is very dangerous.
Contrary to the standards of the day, they didn't just haul in one actor at a time and record that one actor. But in fact, when they did the New York sessions, they got most of the cast in all at the same time. Jeff Bridges was not there. Paul Frees was not there. Rene Auberjonois was not there. But Tammy Grimes, Mia Farrow, Angela Lansbury, Alan Arkin, they were all in the studio over the same 2 to 3 day period, and they were all interacting. Sometimes in the studio at the same time, doing actual dialogue, but always just being there and hearing what the other actors were doing, so it had a chance to feed on each other and inspire their own creativity. That really wasn't the way it was done then. For budgetary reasons, you'd tend to bring in one actor at a time, you'd sit there with the director would have them do 25 different readings of each line, and then they'd stitch it together in editing later. But it was more organic and more richly interconnected for taking this approach instead.
What do you see lying there?
Dead horse.
You're a fool. But I knew that. What about you, wizard? What do you see with your sorcerer's sight? Answer me, you juggler.
I see a horse. Just a white mare.
I thought so.
Now, there are actually some names in the vocal credits which aren't accurate. Nellie Bellflower's name is one of the listed credits for voice actress. And she did work on the film, but the part she didn't make it into the final cut. It wasn't ever in finished animation. She's been credited publicly with being the voice of the tree, but she wasn't the voice of the tree. The tree was voiced by Paul Frees, who also voiced Mabruk and the cat.
Oh, I love you. I love you. Love, 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 love.
Oh, what have I done?
The soundtrack for the film is not unique in the history of animation, but it's unique for its time. Which is to say, when animation began, everyone recorded the voices and the sounds and the music before the animation was done. In the Silly Symphonies cartoons that Disney did, the animation was being done to the music. But over time, as Disney developed feature animation and other people followed in his footsteps, it became the same system that they operate now. Voices would be recorded first because animators had to have the voices to work to, but the music was the last gloss. After a film was animated, after a film was edited, then they'd come in and do a score for it, just like any live action film. But with The Last Unicorn, that's not what they did. Jimmy Webb, who had never done a full score before at that point, dove into the project, wrote all of the songs, wrote the score, and every bit of it was recorded and finished and mixed before any animation was done. And all of the animation was done to the finished music, which is one reason it integrates so enormously well. It almost feels operatic to me when I watch it because every little bit of music has its visual analog that the animators are playing with. It's really quite striking.
Once I can't remember, I was long ago, someone strange. I was innocent and wise and full of pain. Now that I'm a woman, everything is strange.
One of my favorite albums at that time, which I listened to all the time, was Jimmy Webb's personal album, The Highwayman, and where he produced and sings with Art Garfunkel, and it's one of the favorite albums of all time. But The Highwayman especially, which was about reincarnation, and then kind of tied in with my Eastern roots and the themes that I perceived, behind The Last Unicorn. So I said, Jimmy Webb, what about Jimmy Webb? To Jules on our, daily phone conversations. And he just flipped out. He thought that was the best idea possible. So that's when we made the deal with Jimmy.
When the last eagle flies over the last crumbling mountain, and the last lion roars at the last dusty fountain, in the shadow of the forest, though she may be old and worn, they will stare unbelieving at the last unicorn.
Jimmy had done the scratch track and invited Jules and I out to LA to listen to it. So we all went to dinner at Le Serre afterwards, and I rode home in Jimmy's limo to his house, and Jules took a separate car, and we got to bond through that, and then went up to his magnificent house, and Jimmy just sat down on the piano and played all of the songs, gave us a videotape or a cassette tape of the songs, and it was stunning. It's what you heard. But with Jimmy doing the actual track, I wish I still had that cassette, but it was, you know, we were just, you know, over the moon.
Horizon rising up to meet the purple dawn. Dust demon screaming, bring an eagle to lead me on.
When I first saw the motion picture done, I was in a screening room on the old MGM lot with Peter Beagle and Maggie Field, his agent. And it had been this 8-year-long quest, you know. And of course, we all sat enthralled and just overwhelmed, really, by the fact that we were watching what was, you know, an 8-year journey, a lot of sweat and nervousness. And I remember, you know, looking over at Peter to see his expression, and in turn looked at Maggie, who was crying. And that was a really special moment.
When I did see it the first time, I didn't know how to react. I was so braced for the worst. I was so braced for Frosty the Flipping Snowman that I literally did not know what to say. It took me some while and some viewings before it finally soaked in that they had done the very best they possibly could with a limited budget, an odd book, until I finally found myself saying years later, watching it one more time with a friend, oh my God, the bloody thing's a classic. I didn't expect that. Hell, I didn't expect the book to be, for that matter.
Part of the magic of The Last Unicorn is it always has outperformed anyone's expectations. The novel sold better than the publisher expected. The film did better than the distributor expected.
I had every expectation, being an absolute, you know, optimist, you know, an insane optimist, that it was going to be a huge hit. So there was a lot of excitement about that, you know. With the cast, the music, I mean, you know, it had all the markings of being a really great motion picture. But we immediately heard from ITC's own distribution company, AFD, which was run by a fellow by the name Leo Greenfield. He's a great guy, you know, and I thought this, you know, I had met him a number of times talking about what the potential was in the at the box office, and some of the merchandising prospects that and ideas that I'd had. But then they decided they weren't going to release it, and that was, you know, just devastating.
Michael Chase Walker took his cans of film from distributor to distributor to distributor, doing special screenings, and he got turned down by everybody until he finally found a little company based out of Salt Lake City called Jensen Farley. They didn't have much of a track record. They hadn't been in business for terribly long, and they had basically no money to operate on.
So we were back into another situation where, you know, the last people in the world that we wanted to handle the film are the ones we were stuck with. So they wanted to release it, and at that point, I had been literally everywhere in Hollywood to try to get it distributed. And finally, this sort of, you know, Shiksun Classic offshoot of, you know, these were guys who, you know, four-walled productions, you know, like, you know, the American Sunshine Family, or, you know, the Bear guys, or, you know, Grizzly Adams kind of characters. So they were the ones to pick the deal up and ultimately release it.
They released the movie in November of 1982. It opened on 648 theater screens around North America, and it had a promotional budget of not quite $150,000 for that entire run. That's less than $200 per theater in the end when you account for everything. Now, despite that, opening weekend, it was the number 6 film in the United States of America. And on a per-screen basis, it was the number 2 film. It was beating, on a per-screen basis, E.T., An Officer and a Gentleman, Creepshow, First Blood, the original Rambo movie. The only thing in America that had bigger box office per screen was the re-release of The Empire Strikes Back that was in theaters at that time. The second week, because it was doing so well, they added 6% more theaters. Now, we all are box office junkies these days. We know if a movie drops by a certain amount in the first week, it's doing really well. If it drops more than that, it's tanking. The Last Unicorn in its second week went up 6%. It stayed flat on a per-screen basis. That's almost completely unheard of. It happens, but it's very, very rare. And that's where it was on day 17 of its release when Jensen Farley went bankrupt. They went out of business. They imploded. Now, officially on the books, that's it. The movie had a 17-day release. It earned a certain amount of money, and it's down on the books as one of the failures for the year. But we know from personal stories we've collected over the years that it was in some theaters for 6 or 7 months. The theater owners were very, very canny people. There was no longer a distributor to share the money with, to send the money to. They just kept running the movie in hundreds of theaters. We don't know how many, but we know it was hundreds of theaters that just kept running the film as long as people wanted to come see it. We had somebody come to one of the tour shows whose parents met and had their first date going to The Last Unicorn in Chicago in February of 1983, which means it had been in that theater for 5 months. So in fact, if you could take a TARDIS back to 1982 and 83 and keep accurate track of everything, the real numbers would say it was one of the most successful films of the year. But no one will ever tie down those real numbers because Variety takes its reports from the distributors, and if your distributor is bankrupt, there's no one reporting to Variety.
It just seemed so unjust, unfair after all that we had been through. And it was like that until, you know, this miraculous film vault company out of Germany saw it and fell in love with it.
When the movie opened in 1983 in Germany, it outdrew Star Wars. In the same territory, West Germany and Switzerland, just a few years before, Star Wars had done $3.75 million. Last Unicorn did $4.5 million.
They did everything that I had hoped we would do in the United States with merchandising. They had plush dolls and records and toys and all kinds of merchandising deal around it. When you arrived in Munich, they had posters, you know, bigger than huge billboard-sized posters all over the city. The unicorn is coming, the unicorn is coming. It was like a dream come true. Everything that we had hoped for in the United States, we were seeing realized in Germany. They throw this massive ball premiere in a ballroom in the middle of Gloria Palast in Munich with balloons and television cameras, and, you know, just everyone in the German film industry and press was there.
We're all together. Anybody, a lot of people Michael knew, and some I had met, like Christopher Lee, who were being fed practically peacock's tongues. And I still remember the cognac that was brought out near the end of the evening because it had been laid down somewhere in the late 40s. And you could smell it across the room. And Michael and I looked at each other and just started giggling like little kids. Just started laughing at the fantasy and absurdity of it all.
That was the real stuff. That was wine.
The fans of The Last Unicorn are an incredibly diverse lot. Now, of course, I can break it down statistically. We can tell you from the Facebook page or from the screening tour and from other evidence that they're running about 70-30 female-male. The age surprises me because we have fans of all ages. You'd have thought it was a certain period of time who saw that in the theaters in '83 or who caught it in video in the '80s when it was showing on Lifetime or HBO a lot. But no, it's pretty much completely spread out across the age spectrum. What they share is an incredible passion for kind of a wild imagination. They love about this story that it's not a standard story. With The Last Unicorn, it just defies all storytelling structural conventions. It doesn't have a conventional happy ending. It basically says that the only way you will ever achieve what you seek to achieve is by suffering enormous loss.
But what if there isn't a happy ending at all?
There are no happy endings because nothing ends.
Schmendrick, let her stay the way she is. Let her be.
That's not in the story. Lear knows that, and so does she.
This is not lighthearted, fluffy rainbow and pastel material, which is one reason that the men who come to see it and understand it love it so much because it's actually deep and profound and tragic and heroic.
Not all the magic in the world can help her now.
Then what is magic for? What is the use of wizardry if it cannot even save a unicorn?
That's what heroes are for.
Of course, that is exactly what heroes are for.
I love the fans of this film because they themselves are alive. So many of them are artists and creators themselves, even if only in a little way. They've taken some of the magic into their hearts, and they go through their lives a little more open to possibilities.
Fergie has been a raging Last Unicorn fan since she was 8 years old. I've been told you would play this for neighborhood slumber parties, then put a gold star on your forehead and sing all the songs, pretend you were Malty.
No, it was my slumber party. It was my movie that I picked. And yeah, I thought I was the unicorn. I used to put the little stickers on my head and really believe that I could, just turn into one and really be her. And then wanting to be, of course, Lady Amalthea.
Perhaps what sticks with me, this will sound disrespectful, I don't mean it to me, but I get criers. I get people who will stand off, when they're on the autograph line, because they can't talk. They'll stand there and shake. And then sometimes, even in the middle of a conversation, they start to cry. And then there's nothing to do, of course, but get up and lumber around the table and hug them. Just hold them for a while and talk to them. And most of the time, I'll never really know what it was about the book and their past or their childhoods that has them crying. I don't expect it, but I've come to notice it. Sometimes I can spot it in advance. That young person down the line a little way. Yeah, just shaking. Okay, I'll keep an eye out for that.
We were at a comic book convention in San Francisco, and comic book fans tend to look a certain way. We're all kind of geeky and proud of it. And through the room come these two tall, very muscular Latino guys, and they got tattoos everywhere. They look like they're leg breakers for the mob. They look like they spend 9 hours a day in the gym. They're looking out of place, quite frankly. And they're just kind of sliding through the room and looking at things and not reacting. And they see Peter and they see the last unicorn and they stop cold. And they walk up to the table and one of them says, "This is the last unicorn." Peter says, "Yes." "Did you have something to do with this?" "Well, I wrote the novel and I wrote the screenplay for the movie." And the one who hadn't spoken grabbed his forearm and said, "Your movie saved our lives, man." And of course, what do you say? You say, "Please explain." And here's the story they told us. When they were very small boys, 4 years old, 5 years old, little boys, their parents had been going through one of these divorces where furniture is being broken and plates are being thrown, and you expect someone to die at any second, and they scream at each other for hours. And every time one of those fights would begin, these two little boys would go in the front room and shut the door and put the videotape of The Last Unicorn into the player, and they would play it again and again and again until the fighting was over. And when they told us this story, the one who grabbed Peter's wrist said, "We are sane, functioning adults today with families of our own because when we were children, we got to hide out in your world. Thank you." So it's as profound as that on one end, and as straightforward as this on another. There's a woman who came to his Comic-Con table one year, looked to be in her 60s, bought a videotape, bought a book, asked him to sign them. He's asked if the name that she had requested he sign them was her name, and she said, no, that's my great-granddaughter. And Peter said, "How old is your great-granddaughter?" And she said, "She's 1. And Peter said, "This is a little advanced for 1. She said, "You don't understand. I bought your book when it was published in 1968. I read it to my daughter. We watched the movie together the day it opened in our local movie theater. When my daughter had a daughter, she read the book with her. They watched the movie together. And now that my daughter's daughter has had a daughter, I'm going to wait a few years, and when she's old enough, I will read this book with her, and we will watch this movie together. This is a 4-generation family tradition." You can't pay to make that happen. You cannot force that kind of reaction. That means you've hit a chord that profoundly resonates in someone's deepest, deepest heart. And he's done it for millions of people.
I was hired to teach as a screenwriting. at the College of Santa Fe in the Moving Images division. And I had like 30 kids in my class. And, you know, it had gotten out, of course, and this is professor, you know, former CBS, you know, He-Man, all the other animated shows that I was responsible for. And it was like all girls who would have seen The Last Unicorn at that time and had joined the screenwriting class because they had made the connection that I didn't even make, really. And they would come up and just say, this is the most important film, this is my favorite film of my childhood. You know, you changed my childhood.
I'm grateful, stunned, embarrassed, but not for them. Certainly not for them. Sometimes it's like the scene in The Last Unicorn where Schmendrick has actually cast real magic for the first time and summoned up someone who never existed, Robin Hood, and Maid Marian. And he falls flat on his face, picks himself up slowly, thinking, I wonder what I did. I did something. That's still the way I feel about it. It's hard for me to put it in better words. It's hard for me to explain it. But I did something. And I'm constantly amazed, you know, by the variety of people, certainly, you know, who want to talk, want to ask questions, and sometimes just want to tell me how much the book meant to them. If there's one phrase I get that I hear very often, it's, thank you for my childhood. I don't necessarily have any idea exactly what that phrase means to them, but they know. So, for lack of a better word, I'm constantly in awe.
Unicorns are in the world again. No sorrow will live in me as long as that joy, save one. And I thank you for that part too.
Robert Nathan was the only person who predicted what was going to happen to The Last Unicorn. When I sent him the book in manuscript, he didn't even notice it had been dedicated to him. Read right past that, as I recall, and called me from LA to say, this is going to be the book people know who don't know that you ever wrote anything else. You caught lightning in a bottle, and all you can do is just hang on. I'm often asked, especially by young people, children, do you believe in unicorns? And I usually settle for saying I have met some people in my life, not many, whom I'm perfectly willing to believe are transformed unicorns, getting by in the world of human beings because they have to. I've met a few people that I'm quite willing to believe are actually Amalthea. Beyond that, I just do the best I can to take people for who they are and to find out more about them than appears on the surface.